architect Meera Milan Ajit. She is currently working as a senior architect at L&T Construction, Buildings and Factories. She has worked for various commercial and institutional projects for the Engineering Design Research Centre, ranging from shopping malls, IT parks to metro rails. She has attended many national conferences and seminars. She has also worked as a freelancer in Chennai for various projects.
Hello and welcome to the UGC lecture series on architecture, and I will be taking you through HOA 3, that is History of Architecture and Culture 3, AR 6302. Today we will be seeing the early Christian architecture. In HOA 1 and HOA 2 you would have basically seen the early architecture and the prehistoric architecture and the Indian architecture. So moving on, this History of Architecture 3 will take you through the early Christian architecture or the Christian architecture. The reason why we are learning this is because, see, Christianity is one religion that came, conquered and changed the whole of the world and how it functioned at one point of time. That includes architecture also. Christianity came in, it conquered, and every part of architecture that was existing at that point completely changed and became something very new, and something which is a mixture of what was before and what was considered to be the basic planning concepts of the Christianity then, and that very much influenced what architecture is today. So that is the reason why we are learning this particular History of Architecture 3. Moving on, the first unit is the early Christian architecture. Today in this lecture you will be seeing from the birth of Christianity to the influences of Christianity in basically architecture in all aspects, church planning in the Basilican concept, in the Byzantine architecture concept, and various examples of those. Talking about the birth of Christianity, as everybody knows, the Christianity was born in the eastern province of Roman Empire. It was carried on by the missionaries of Rome to the center of the world empire, that was Rome then. See, back when you see at that time, when the Christianity came into existence, it was almost like Christianity became alive. It was almost like it became living. So basically what happened at that point of time, there were a lot of people who decided to take up Christianity and decided to take it to different parts of the world and make it expand and become something that what is it today. It became a power, it became the most ruling religion of the world. So why was it taken to Rome? The Rome at that point of time was the most powerful kingdom, and it was actually the center of the world empire. Everything from art, music, culture, literature, architecture, everything grew in Rome, became what it is in Rome. And Roman architecture, if you see architecture wise, is one of the most prominent architecture of the ancient times. So if you see the various influences that Christianity had in the in the architecture, if you see, basically there was geographical influences. See, while as I said, when Christianity came to Rome, Rome was like one of the power capitals of the world. At that time, Rome was like India of today, as in there were like many religions, as in many gods, and people had different beliefs that was happening then. And what happened was, when Christianity tried striving and becoming what it was, the Roman Empire and the people of Rome protested. There were like amidst the protest, amidst the war, amidst the hue and cry, the Christianity grew and it became the most universal religion of the Roman Empire. Christianity became the reason why Romans bound and became a part of one religious culture. So from different beliefs and from different perspectives, the Romans decided to come together as one and become a part of one religious group, to follow one art, one culture, one understanding under the name of Christianity. So it unified Rome under one particular religion. So there were geological influences too. See, geological influence was not as direct as that of the geographical influence. The geological influence was pretty indirect. See, the Roman buildings and Roman architecture was, as I said, one of the most famous forms of architecture back then. They had very versatile design, very versatile planning concept, different detailing concepts. So at that time the Roman buildings were like the epitome of architecture, power, success, everything. So when the Roman buildings were ruined, and those, if you see in these pictures, you can see the ruins of the Roman buildings, and these kind of buildings became the quarry from where the materials were taken, or planning concepts were taken, or maybe the elements were taken as such to form the Christian churches or the Christian architecture that later evolved to what it became. Okay, so this particular geological influences or the building influences from the Roman buildings, this became the style. So both for the construction and decoration or anything, I mean, that became the basic concept of the first early Christian church development or architecture, whatever you call it. Moving on, climatic influences. As you know, architecture is very much influenced by the climatic aspects of a geographical place. As in, if you see Rome, Rome had its own climatic zones, climatic region. It varied, yes, maybe from one part to another, but then that had a particular influence in shaping up the architecture of the Christian time. Religious influence. So in the history, if you see, there is no history as striking as that of the rise of Christianity. I mean, for any religion, every religion rose, every religion conquered, it became the power. But then if you see the rise of Christianity, that was something very gigantic. If you see, in every aspects of society, Christianity conquered and became something which was like much bigger than what was experienced before. So some of the greatest architecture monuments of all times was created during this period, as in that this influenced the creation of certain architecture monuments which we call the monuments of all times. At that particular time, Christianity and the Christian church was purposed, or it was made to shelter the worshippers who met at one particular place to pray or to call for an unseen deity. So at that time, the only basic understanding or the requirement of a Christian church was to create a space where they can accommodate so many people. So the social influences were there. So as I said, there were a lot of political disturbances, social outcries against the rise of Christianity, but Christianity definitely rose from that. But all these outcries did have small influences in the Christian architecture, and now the architecture was developed. Historical from Constantine to the death of Gregory the Great, Christian architecture had a lot of changes, a lot of upliftment, a lot of making. Constantine was the one who decided to actually bring together Rome as under the name of Christianity, and Gregory the Great was important because under him, that was a time when the Christianity came to a standstill, the Christian architecture came to a standstill. After that, the architecture never developed. After that, around 2-3 centuries, architecture in Egypt, as in the Christian architecture in Egypt, came to a standstill. As in there was no further advancement in that. It was kind of plain, as in what was there. Nothing new came up at that particular point of time. Moving on, the church planning. If you talk about the church planning, the first basic concept of church planning happened as the Basilican concept. The Basilican concept of church planning, if you see in the slides, the basilicas were the Roman halls of justice, and that served as the early Christians' model of their churches. So, as I said before, Roman architecture became the quarry of the architecture from where the Christian architecture was developed. So the same way, if you see this Roman halls of justice, became the basic planning idea of a Christian church, because that was big, that was huge, it had space, it could keep people inside, it could give shelter to people. So that was what they took as a basic planning concept. The term basilica applied to the Christian church from the 4th century. So that was dedicated to the king of the kings. So at that time the king was the main part of an empire. So the king of the king was somebody who ruled even the king. So that directly meant the Christian church. So that was how important the Christian church became at that time of the Roman Empire. So this was a Christian church or a basilica was usually erected over the burial site of a saint for whom that church was dedicated to. So if you see, as I said, the Christianity was taken to another level by the saints or the monarchs who preached Christianity at that part of time. So at that point of time, those saints were the most important part of Christianity, and under each saint's name there will be one church or two dedicated to them. So these churches were actually built over the burial sites of those saints under whom this church is named. So there were like almost 31 basilican churches in Rome alone. So the first church which we will be learning as an example today is Saint Clement, Rome. This church, if you see in the picture, this is a Saint Clement's elevation. If you see, this was built in 1084 AD to 1108 AD. The construction lasted for such big period. So this had a basilican plan of the Christian ritual, and this was made to shelter a number of worshippers. It is, as I said, rebuilt over an earlier building. This church particularly retains the original arrangement of the existing building of the 5th century. And if you see in the plan, there is an atrium. This atrium is covered by arcades, and that creates an imposing approach. The ambulatory is nothing but continuous arcades. This atrium has a central fountain in the center. It is for the water of ablutions. Ablution is basically a Christian function that has been happening, a ceremony, if you say, that has been happening since ages. So this fountain is a fountain of ablution. If you see, this part is a church part and this part is the atrium part. The atrium part and the church part is separated by a narthex. This is a covered narthex. So after the narthex opens into a big nave, and the nave has on either side a clerestory of windows which provides lighting to the particular nave which I am talking about. On either side of naves you have aisles, and this aisle is almost half the size of the nave in dimension. So the nave has that is the main part or the biggest hall of a church. If you see, as I said, the narthex opened into a nave and it is lighted by the clerestory of small windows. You can see it here. Here in this picture you can see the clerestory of windows, and here you have the aisles on either sides, and the center you have the nave. So in this semicircular apse, this part is where the bishop sits. He took the place in the center of the semicircular apse so that he can face the nave and face the place where all the members took places. So the members took their place here, and the bishop took place here. If you see, there is an altar in front of the bishop where the Christian ceremonies were conducted, and the choir happened here. Choir is and was still the most important part of a Christian ceremonies. It keeps happening, whichever ceremony happens, choir keeps happening. So there was a canopy which was erected over columns to support the altar below it. So if you see, there is the central dome above the apse which I said. This is the apse, and above that there is a central dome which you can see in the picture. This central dome is like the main part of this particular church because it's made of glass mosaic, and that gives this fabulously crafted interiors for this particular church. And there is a picture or a figure of the Christ in glory in the center. If you see here, there is. and there is timber roof which is supported by rafters to support this particular roof dome, if I say, and this becomes a major part of the interior of this church. Moving on, talking about another church, we have St. Peter's in Rome, which is also another example of basilican concept of architecture. This was constructed in AD 330 and was erected by Constantine. This was erected on the site of the martyrdom of St. Peter, and after whom this church is named. St. Peter's today is one of the most famous churches in the world. If I can say, it is the most famous church in the world, and that is not the same church which I am talking about. This particular church which is present today is actually made after pulling down the existing church which was made by Constantine long back. So, this particular church which is present right now is present on the site this particular church which I am talking about right now was existing. So, if you see the plan, you can see again there is an atrium and you have columns on all sides and there is a fountain in the center. This particular atrium is separated from the church again by the covered narthex, and you can see the nave in the center and you can see two aisles on either sides. The aisles are double storied here, that is a difference, and the double storied aisles have clear stories on both sides which gives light to the center nave, and there is transept on the other side, and that is where this is the apse, and the difference is this apse is where the Pope sits. The Pope being the highest power of the Christianity, he sits in St. Peter's Rome, and he faces the east and he faces the altar towards the eastern side. The next style of architecture which developed after this is the Byzantine architecture. The Byzantium renamed Constantinople. Byzantium was renamed Constantinople after Constantine, its imperial founder, and was inaugurated the capital of Roman Empire in AD 330. The Constantinople had no good building stones, so the local materials like clay, bricks, rubble, all those were used as a construction material for the Byzantine architecture, which is a little different from that what was happening in the basilican concept of architecture. So, the practice of placing many domes over a building came into existence in the Byzantine type of architecture. If you see in the previous basilican concept which we discussed before, there was a dome, but then there was single dome. But if you see in this kind of architecture, there were multiple domes over one single building. The first example which we will be seeing in the Byzantine architecture is St. Vital Ravenna. This was made in AD 526 to 541. If you see, this is the church which I am talking about. It was founded by Justinian to commemorate his recovery of Ravenna. This church is extremely evident Byzantine influence. I mean, if you see the church, you can say it's a Byzantine church, if you know Byzantine architecture, that is. Basically, the plan of this church is an octagon. If you see, there are two concentric octagons, and the center one being, the inner one being 54 feet 9 inches in width, and the outer one being 115 feet in width. So, if you see, the apsidal chances opens to the apse area, and the other sides, if you have, you can see there will be semicircular arches on all sides. So, these arches form these small pendentifs on which the dome is rested. A pendentif is the small spaces which is formed when two arches collide. If you see, this is a pendentif and these are arches, and on this rests the big dome of the church. Specifically, this dome is different from the other domes of churches because this was made by earthen pots fitted on each other, and that brings the lightness of the structure, and that was why this dome is particularly famous, particularly different from other Byzantine architecture churches. The interiors are remarkably calm. If you see, the exterior is very simple, but the interiors is remarkably carved, with capitals and mosaic lined walls, and it's very rich in the interiors and very simple when it comes to exteriors. In the center of the apse, if you see, you can see the figure of Christ seated on an azure globe, and exterior is large thick bricks with thin mortar joints. The next church which I am talking about is the Church of the Divine Wisdom, or Hagia Sophia. Hagia Sophia today is a very famous mosque, and Hagia Sophia then was a very famous church. That itself shows how different architecture of different religion kind of intervened and intertwined, and it had very similar features, and they realized, if you see, there was a time when both the architecture was pretty similar. I mean, like, what they wanted was the same, what the religion asked for was the same. So the architectural concepts, if you see, Roman architecture gave rise to Christian architecture, that slowly evolved into Islamic architecture. So Hagia Sophia is one example which actually can tell you that point where both the architecture merged, because then it served as a church and now it is one of the most famous mosques in the world. Hagia Sophia, as you all know, is in Constantinople, and it's also called the Church of Divine Wisdom. It was built between AD 532 to 537. It was built by the order of Justinian by architect Anthemius of Tralles and Isidorus of Miletus. Basically, the reason why Hagia Sophia is so famous is because of the number of domes it has. If you see, you have the atrium with the marble columns around, which gives way to two narthex. Yes, this church has two different narthex. One is the outer narthex, one is the inner narthex. The atrium, if you see, it is 220 feet cross 30 feet in dimension. The narthex, if you see, has two floors. The upper floor has the gallery, and the below floor gives way to the nave. So what you see here, you can see that there is like a huge dome in the center, and there are small domes on sides. So there are two principal semi-domes in the east and west, and it upends against each other for the great supporting arches, and that forms the buttress. Buttress is a structure made of stone or brick which supports against a wall, and that particular buttress gives support for the wall. So the monumental interiors of the Hagia Sophia, if you talk about, it has 4 semicircular arches, you can see, upon which one huge dome is rested, which is 180 feet above the ground, and it is 107 feet in diameter. The whole area is enclosed by semi-domes. If you see, these are semi-domes, and forming one oval nave. The nave of this church is oval in shape, you can see. And the first floor you has the women's gallery, and below you have arcades and the nave. The aisles are there in two sides, and actually the reason why the plan is almost a square is because of the introduction of these aisles around these naves. So if you see, the dome is constructed with bricks and has mortar joints of almost the same thickness as that of the brick. The walls and floors are led with mosaics, and the columns are of many colors, and that is why the interiors of Hagia Sophia, if you see, is very flashy and very exquisite compared to other churches of till that period. No church had as an exquisite interior as that of Hagia Sophia. So there are columns with bronze rings encircling them and ionic walls above them. If you see, below the particular dome, you have 40 small windows. These small windows gives the lighting and light and shadow effect of the nave of this particular church. That is the best part of this church, and this is considered to be the masterpiece of Byzantine architecture of all times. Moving on, the last church which we will be discussing in this particular episode today is St. Mark's Church in Venice. St. Mark's Church is not only the most important church of Venice. St. Mark's is the landmark of Venetian architecture. This was constructed between AD 1042 to 1071, and it reflects the art of Byzantium so much that the Venetian architecture itself was influenced from this. So, if you see, facade of St. Mark's is very different from the facade of other Byzantine churches that you will see. It has very glittering facade, very exquisitely carved, and it's way different from the simple and plain facades of the other Byzantine churches. If you see, in front of St. Mark's, you have a vast open space which is made of marble, and this becomes like the public atrium to the church, and the particular church which I am talking about faces the Piazza of St. Marco. The Piazza of St. Marco is very important because it is the most important marketplace of Venice. This church stands on the site of original Basilican church with the same name, which was founded to invite or receive the body of St. Mark's in AD 864. That particular church was brought down to make this particular church which is existing right now, and the plan was completely modified, and that resembles the Church of Apostles in Constantinople. If you see, it's a plan is a basically plan of a cross, and it has a central dome which is 42 feet in diameter, which you can see here. That is the central dome, and there is a dome over each arm of the cross. There is a dome here, and here. So there are that many domes above the church, and the church is exactly square in plan. Other than that, after you bring in all the arcades and everything, the church plan is exactly square in shape. As I said, the exterior is cladded with color mosaic panels, and the interiors is gorgeously decorated with color marbles and glass mosaics. The exterior adorns. The difference between this particular church from other churches is that there is a lot of influence from other foreign lands in this particular church, and that is why this particular church forms as a transition of the previous Byzantine architecture to the next level of church architecture that it was evolving to be. So basically, summarizing what we saw today, we saw the birth and rise of early Christianity, how it was born, how it grew, and what it became. The influences on Christian architecture and of Christian architecture on various different buildings that was existing. The Basilican concept of church planning with its architecture styles and its examples, and how it evolved to be the Byzantine style of church planning, and its architecture styles, the concepts and examples. The questions from this lecture. The first question is, what are the various factors that affected the early Christian architecture? What differentiates the Basilican concept and Byzantine concepts of planning? The third question is, explain the architecture features of Basilican concept of planning with one example. And the fourth is, explain Byzantine architecture citing the example of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. That is all for this episode today, and the next episode we will see the medieval Christian architecture and Renaissance in Christian architecture. Thank you.